This investigation is sponsored by Keeps. In 1935, reclined on the daybed of his dimly lit office, an unassuming clairvoyant speaking from a trance warned of catastrophic events brewing in Europe. Indicated by the Austrians, Germans, and later the Japanese joining in their influence, these will gradually make for a growing of animosities. Unless there is interference from the supernatural forces that are active in the affairs of nations and peoples, the whole world will be set on fire by the militaristic groups. It's one thing for a psychic to correctly predict the nations that would make up the Axis several years before the Second World War broke out. But even stranger was his claim that the war would only be won if supernatural forces intervened. A little-known fact about World War II is that British intelligence formed the Witchcraft Research Center to combat the Nazis' own occult units, which ultimately led to the capture of Hitler's deputy Führer, Rudolf Hess. The clairvoyant who foresaw this event was Edgar Cayce, also known as the Sleeping Prophet. Many consider his prophecies to be the strongest evidence of paranormal and psychic abilities ever recorded due to their depth of documentation and incomparably high accuracy. Some of his prophecies, which later proved to be true, include the use of blood in diagnosing diseases, the La Niña and El Niño climate patterns, as well as the most devastating stock market crash in American history, which occurred in 1929. With date and details exactly as Cayce predicted on two separate occasions. The Sleeping Prophet also made claims about history's most enduring mystery, the lost city of Atlantis, which surprisingly hold water. This is because in these claims, he made a prediction which turned out to be fact. He stated that a hidden tunnel system, forgotten for over 2,000 years, would eventually be discovered beneath the front left paw of the Great Sphinx of Giza. Indeed, in 1987, a Japanese expedition performed electromagnetic sound surveys of the Sphinx, and they detected tunnels underneath that exact location, just as Cayce described, which remain completely unexcavated to this day. I'm Mr. Mythos, and I'd like to introduce you to Edgar Cayce, the Sleeping Prophet of Atlantis. Edgar Cayce was born in 1877 into a humble Christian home in Kentucky. As a boy, he reported speaking to his deceased grandfather, as well as playing with little people in the forest. And later, while studying the Bible in a woodland hut, a winged woman appeared to him and asked him what he wanted more than anything in the world. He responded that he wanted to help others, and in particular, sick children. This same entity would later reappear as Cayce was failing in school. His father struck him off of his chair as Cayce struggled to spell. In a daze, he heard the winged woman's voice tell him that they could help if only he just slept a bit. Cayce begged his father for rest, put his head on his spelling book, and when he woke up, the boy knew every answer and could recite every word. But more than this inexplicable gift of memorization, which he used to become top of his class, he soon discovered that he could help people suffering from ailments. And not long after, he began to predict the future. As an adult, this seer acquired the nickname the Sleeping Prophet because of his peculiar technique. In order to channel his higher self into a trance-like state, he would loosen his tie, kick off his shoes, then lay down on his daybed and promptly fall asleep. His wife recorded his words during these trances. As fame spread of Cayce's power, tens of thousands of people sought his help, including the iconic inventor Thomas Edison, the magician Harry Houdini, and even the then President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson. Perhaps the most clear evidence that Cayce was not a charlatan was the fact that he refused to charge for his readings. he helped those in need for free, making his living as a local photographer. In all, 14,306 psychic readings were fully documented, 132 of which regarded the treatment of hair loss, which many of Edgar Cayce's patients suffered. Statistics show that 2 out of 3 men will experience some form of male pattern baldness by the time they're 35. But if these men were alive today, perhaps it wouldn't have been a problem, thanks to Keeps, a subscription service which makes it incredibly easy to treat male pattern baldness from home, with FDA-approved medication discreetly delivered to your door. Keeps even gives you access to a licensed doctor to recommend the right treatment and answer any questions you may have along the way. My family has a history of male pattern baldness, so I use Keeps to keep my hair thick and beautiful. In many ancient traditions, a person's hair is closely tied with spirituality, such as peyote in Judaism and kesh in Sikhism, with some cultures even believing hair acts as an antenna, collecting details of the spiritual world. At least in the physical world, I can tell you, Mrs. Mythos definitely appreciates me using Keeps. If you're ready to prevent hair loss, go to keeps.com/mythos or click the link in the description to receive 50% off your first order. That's keeps.com/mythos. Now back to the Sleeping Prophet. Edgar Cayce's most famous prophecy came to him while he slept in his office, surrounded by his loved ones. To the shock of all, he began madly whispering predictions about a mystery as old as time itself. For literally thousands of years, explorers have sought the lost city of Atlantis, speculating on its culture, technology, and what truly became of the Atlantean people. The traditional narrative is that a flood swept the nation to sea, destroying everything in its wake and drowning the city's entire populace. In reality, however, rarely does a natural disaster kill everyone in the location it strikes. Even the most severe disasters usually have survivors. For instance, some even survived Mount Vesuvius's eruption at Pompeii. Logic then dictates that there must have been at least one survivor of Atlantis. Cayce, from his daybed, claimed that there were many. Many ancient writers were not shy to express their belief that Atlantis was once a real place, such as Crantor, a student in the Greek philosopher Plato's academy, with Plato's writings being the earliest known record of Atlantis. Atlantis also featured in the writings of the biographer Plutarch, who wrote that the Athenian lawmaker and poet Solon had learned the story of Atlantis from the Egyptians, who apparently knew Atlantis very well. Edgar Cayce also believed a strong connection existed between the Atlanteans and the Egyptians. In his most famous reading, Cayce claimed that Atlantis was destroyed in a final catastrophic event around 10,000 BC, and that through superior technology, the Atlanteans learned of their city's imminent destruction and hid their secrets in a grand library located underneath the Sphinx. Cayce provided many details of Atlantis in its prime, too, describing it not as a Bronze Age civilization, but instead a technologically and scientifically advanced society, complete with submarines, electromagnetic aircraft, elevators, air balloons, a broadcasting system, and electricity powered by giant crystals. Cayce termed Atlantean civilization the Golden Age. Perhaps most strangely, he claimed that those who lived in Atlantis, while human, were able to live extremely long lives, some for as long as 10,000 years, through a sophisticated Atlantean rejuvenation process used to restore one's youth over and over. This required the use of a specific crystal, the Tuaui stone, which Cayce described as a six-sided cylindrical quartz, which used a type of ultraviolet light to power it. Interestingly, this sounds similar to the workings of a modern-day laser beam. So, what actually became of Atlantis? To begin, we should take a look at the more pragmatic possibilities. An interesting fact of history is that the ancient Greeks documented a vast number of so-called ghost islands. These islands varied in characteristics. Some were hot, some were cold, some rich with fauna, while others were utterly deserted. Only one theme remains common among them. All of these places seem to have disappeared. At this point, we must seriously ask ourselves, why would the ancient Greeks falsely record so many islands? The only sensible conclusion is that these islands indeed existed, but were ultimately destroyed by natural disasters. Historians and academics generally attribute Atlantis' disappearance, if it truly existed, to volcanic eruption, earthquakes, and tsunamis. And in Plato's accounts, he describes Atlantis as being very mountainous, which fits the idea of it being a volcanic island. The Sleeping Prophet, however, claimed otherwise. As opposed to being destroyed naturally, Edgar Cayce stated that in its final days, two rival parties fought for control over Atlantis. The children of the Law of One, who wanted to return to spiritual attunement with nature, and the sons of Belial, who aimed to exploit natural resources for material gain. This conflict ultimately ended in the obliteration of their entire civilization in a series of mega explosions, possibly a nuclear war. Prior to the final sinking, however, Cayce said that a mass exodus of Atlanteans occurred, and in particular, their historians fled to Egypt with whom they were close. The Atlanteans who survived vowed one day to return, to restore the glory of Atlantis when the world was once again ready. And to ensure they indeed could, they hid their secrets and most precious treasures and technology, including the Tuaui stone, inside the Hall of Records, a hidden chamber deep beneath the sands of Egypt. The Sleeping Prophet, from his shadowy office, predicted that underneath the Great Sphinx of Giza, there existed a vast network of underground tunnels connected to a huge library, the Hall of Records. Cayce pinpointed the library's exact location, claiming that it was hidden underneath the paws of the Sphinx. And stored inside of it was Atlantean knowledge of astronomy, magic, medicine, alchemy, mathematics, and religion. This mysterious subterranean vault may actually be connected to Hermes Trismegistus, an ancient Egyptian prophet who possibly lived 4,000 to 6,000 years ago, and was a supposed holder of the Philosopher's Stone. Trismegistus was the author of the Emerald Tablet, a legendary artifact which many believe to hold the secrets of alchemy and life itself. I previously made a video on the Emerald Tablet, which I'll link to at the end. It's widely believed that Alexander the Great hid the original Emerald Tablet artifact underneath the Great Pyramid of Giza. The Christian ascetic Clement of Alexandria added to this theory, stating that alongside the Emerald Tablet were 42 other sacred tablets, stored in a subterranean vault beneath Egypt, hidden until mankind was worthy of the knowledge that they held. If the tablets of Trismegistus were stored in the Hall of Records, perhaps it is where the prophet first gained his knowledge of alchemy. It's well known that the ancient Egyptians took their knowledge to the grave with them, so the idea of a massive, forgotten underground library is not impossible. Hidden chambers were certainly a trend with the ancient Egyptians. In fact, the corpse of Hermes Trismegistus himself was apparently found sitting in a secret cave underneath a statue in Turkey. Regarding this Atlantean subterranean library, the Hall of Records, more than legends, there may be actual eyewitnesses made by respected ancient historians, such as Herodotus in the 5th century BC. This I have actually seen, a work beyond words. For if anyone put together the buildings of the Greeks, they would seem lesser in both effort and expense to this labyrinth. Even the pyramids are beyond words, and each was equal to many and mighty works of the Greeks. Yet the labyrinth surpasses even the pyramids. What's truly shocking about this account is that Herodotus regarded the labyrinth as more marvelous than the pyramids, which is quite the statement, considering the Great Pyramids of Giza were one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. In the 4th century AD, the Arab philosopher Iamblichus recorded widespread Egyptian belief that there was an entrance to a hidden, revered chamber beneath the Sphinx. This entrance, obstructed in our day by sands and rubbish, may still be traced between the forelegs of the crouched colossus. It was formerly guarded by a bronze gate whose secret spring could be operated only by the Magi. It was guarded by public respect, and a sort of religious fear maintained its inviolability better than armed protection would have done. As far as modern archaeology is concerned, Edgar Cayce's claim that an underground tunnel system lies beneath the front left paw of the Sphinx turned out to be absolutely true. As we learned at the beginning of this video, the electromagnetic sound surveys of the 1987 Japanese expedition detected secret tunnels beneath that exact location. These tunnels have never been explored or even excavated, and no one is sure how deep they go, how long they are, or where they lead. All further examination was blocked by the Egyptian government. All this said, Cayce's claims are worthy of at least some validity. As he lay there on his daybed, the sleeping prophet added one last detail. In the Hall of Records, there is an Atlantean flying vehicle which was used to help construct the Great Pyramid, and inside the library, tunnels leading into habitable areas of the inner earth. If we are to believe that this grand vault held the last vestige of Atlantean technology, then it's fair to say that a custodian was needed. After all, why would this magnificent civilization, whose people could live for over 10,000 years, allow their secrets to rot away? In the contested magical grimoire, Le Poule Noir, more commonly known by his English name, the Black Pullet, or the Black Screech Owl, one of the French leader Napoleon Bonaparte's officers, during their quest through North Africa, engages Arab Bedouins in battle, who overcome his troops and brutally slaughter every soldier but him. The unnamed officer writes that, after this defeat, he sat gravely wounded in the shadow of the Great Pyramids of Giza, lamenting on his certain death. Suddenly, he heard a noise behind him. A single stone had been rolled aside, and from a hole underneath emerged an old hermit, who carried the injured man inside. Using magic and tinctures, the hermit managed to nurse the officer back to health. In Le Poule Noir, the officer writes of the magic spells taught to him by the hermit within the subterranean apartment located underneath the pyramid. There he was taught the secrets of the ancient Egyptians. Connected to the hermit's apartment, there were supposedly endless galleries, vast halls, banquet rooms, and chambers filled to the ceiling with treasure, as well as a magnificent library. Is it possible that this elderly underground dwelling hermit was the Hall of Records custodian, the caretaker to the secrets of the Egyptians, to the technology of the Atlanteans? And if so, is he still there today? Edgar Cayce was not the only mystic to have drawn a connection between the Great Sphinx of Giza and the lost civilization of Atlantis. This belief was also shared by the French occultist Alexandre Saint-Yves, famous for his theories on Agartha, the subterranean network of inner Earth, which fans of my channel probably know very well by now. In the 19th century, Saint-Yves put forth the claim that not only was the Sphinx built by escapees of the destruction of Atlantis, but that it was constructed around 12,000 BC, many thousands of years prior to the accepted dating in mainstream Egyptology. 50 years after the death of Saint-Yves, the Egyptologist and fellow French occultist R.A. Schwaller furthered this idea by introducing the controversial archaeological theory of water erosion. After living in Egypt for 12 years and carefully investigating the Sphinx, Schwaller concluded that the Sphinx's body had visibly been eroded by floods, which indicated that it was far, far older than the pyramids it neighbored. Schwaller and a growing number of modern Egyptologists argue that because of these visible fissures on the Sphinx's front and inside its enclosure, the accepted age of the Sphinx, and thus our understanding of the ancient Egyptian timeline, may be completely wrong. Years later, the Egyptologist John Anthony West attributed the Sphinx's erosion to the Nile floods, which occurred between 15,000 and 10,000 BC. West later had his claims validated by the geologist Robert Schoch, who agreed that the Sphinx was indeed constructed around 9,700 BC. Edgar Cayce never mentioned whether the Atlanteans built the Sphinx themselves or if they simply found it that way. However, when one really thinks about it, a highly advanced civilization such as the Atlanteans would surely rely on their own technology to secure their people's legacy, rather than primitive ancient Egyptian methods. Alongside this, many have claimed that it was in fact the Atlanteans who taught the dynastic Egyptians how to construct their pyramids and monoliths. If the Sphinx was constructed during or after some cataclysmic flood, which occurred approximately 12,000 years ago, then Cayce's dates match up. He believed that the Atlanteans were displaced around 10,000 BC and that they fled to Egypt. Egypt, around this time, according to the water erosion theory, was also suffering the after effects of a large deluge, or flood. However, because some parts of the Sphinx show no signs of water erosion, we can theorize that the Sphinx was not fully submerged, meaning the Atlanteans could have sought refuge inside its underground complexes and halls, which scientists have categorically proven to exist. In our modern world, the occult is often mocked and ridiculed, and out of all the esoteric practices, the most denigrated is undoubtedly Cayce's art, clairvoyance. Psychics are regarded by most as frauds, profiting from sly readings, boisterous fortune-telling, and falsely communicating with a person's dead relatives. Because Cayce claimed to be a psychic, his prophecies have mostly been disregarded, despite many of them seeming to have been very accurate. According to his biographer, Thomas Sugrue, there are hundreds of people throughout the United States who will testify at the drop of a hat to his accuracy. And in the book, The Outer Limits of Edgar Cayce's Power, which set out to demonstratively prove his psychic readings incorrect, it was ultimately concluded that a whopping 85% of the time, Cayce was right. This clearly indicates some kind of supernatural foresight, or at the very least, an ability to make astoundingly accurate predictions. The Sleeping Prophet's prophecies proving true, however, were a curse for Edgar Cayce, who, later in his life, saw visions warning him that if he used his psychic abilities more than twice a day, it would eventually kill him. Still, the Sleeping Prophet continued his work in order to help those in need of his unique gift. His request pile was ever growing, and at the age of 67, Cayce was performing nearly 8 readings a day. And as he did so, his friends and family watched the man they loved waste away. On the 1st of January 1945, Cayce predicted that he would be buried in 4 more days. On January 3rd, he had died. The next day, the Sleeping Prophet was buried at his birthplace in Kentucky. While in the waking world, Edgar Cayce enjoyed gardening and cooking, running his photography studio and leading Sunday school at his church. He was a humble man who never profited financially from his psychic ability, and he remains one of the most convincing and prolific seers in history. So we must truly wonder, will the survivors of Atlantis one day return as Cayce predicted? Does the Hall of Records really exist beneath the Sphinx? And how did the golden age of the Atlanteans shape the ancient world, and subsequently, the world we live in today? Let me know your theories in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, definitely check out my investigation of the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, which is said to hold the secrets of alchemy and the Philosopher's Stone. I'm Mr. Mythos. I'll see you there.